We need to reconsider the timeline for the merger.
That is non-negotiable at this stage.
The sound of a door slamming echoed through the small apartment as Emma stormed out, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, Michael stood frozen, his daughter's school project shattered on the floor between them, just like the trust they'd spent months building. He never imagined his new boss would become so important to both their lives, or that a simple question about changing clothes would lead to this moment that would change everything. If you're feeling invested already, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that explore the complicated, messy, beautiful reality of human connections. Your support helps us continue sharing these emotional journeys that remind us we're never truly alone in our struggles. Michael Collins hadn't planned on becoming a single father at 32. But life rarely follows our carefully laid plans, does it? 3 years ago, his wife Sophia had kissed him and their 5-year-old daughter Emma goodbye before heading to work, never to return. A distracted driver, a red light, and in an instant, Michael's world collapsed. The grief consumed him at first. He took leave from his job as a software developer, barely functioning through the fog of loss while trying to explain to Emma why mommy wasn't coming home. The nights were the worst, Emma's nightmares, his insomnia, both of them adrift without their anchor. "Daddy, who's going to take care of me when you go to heaven too?" Emma had asked one night, her small voice trembling in the darkness of her bedroom. The question had jolted Michael from his grief. He realized then that while he couldn't control what had happened, he could control what happened next. Emma needed him, not just physically present, but truly there. The next morning, he'd made them both breakfast, enrolled in grief counseling, and started rebuilding their lives one painful day at a time. By Emma's 8th birthday, they had established a new normal. Michael had returned to work, found a reliable after-school program for Emma, and they had their routines: Taco Tuesdays, Saturday morning pancakes, and Sunday afternoon walks in the park where they would talk about Sophia, keeping her memory alive without letting it consume them. But financially, they were struggling. Michael's salary barely covered their modest apartment, Emma's school needs, and the mountain of medical bills that had accumulated during Sophia's brief time in intensive care. He needed a better-paying position, which is why he'd applied for the senior developer role at Horizon Technologies. The interview with Horizon CEO, Katherine Chen, had been intimidating. At 40, Katherine had built her company from the ground up, earning a reputation for brilliance and uncompromising standards. Her sleek office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline made Michael acutely aware of his slightly wrinkled shirt and the children's sticker he discovered on his briefcase just before entering the building. "Your technical skills are impressive, Mr. Collins," Katherine had said, studying his resume through stylish glasses. "But there's a 2-year gap here." Michael had taken a deep breath. "My wife died unexpectedly. I took some time off to care for our daughter." Something had shifted in Katherine's expression then, a momentary softening before her professional mask returned. "I see. And how do you manage childcare now?" "I make it work," Michael had replied simply. "Emma comes first, always, but I've never missed a deadline." To his surprise, Katherine had offered him the job on the spot, with a salary that made his eyes widen and flexible hours that would accommodate Emma's schedule. It felt too good to be true. And perhaps it was. The first few months at Horizon had been challenging. Katherine was a demanding boss, expecting excellence and complete dedication. Michael worked harder than he ever had, determined to prove her faith in him wasn't misplaced while still being there for Emma. It was during a particularly stressful project that Katherine first visited his apartment. The company server had crashed at 9 p.m., and they needed to restore critical client data before morning. Unable to leave Emma alone, Michael had reluctantly asked Katherine to bring the backup drives to his place so he could work from home. "I apologize for the mess," Michael said as he opened the door, acutely aware of Emma's toys scattered across the living room and the stack of unwashed dishes in the sink. Katherine had stepped inside, taking in the modest apartment with curious eyes. "No need to apologize for living, Mr. Collins. Emma had appeared then, curious about the visitor. "Are you Daddy's boss? He says you're super smart but kind of scary." Michael had wanted the floor to swallow him whole, but Katherine had laughed, a genuine, warm sound that transformed her face. "Is that so? Well, your daddy is super smart too, and only a little bit scary when he's concentrating." That night had changed something between them. As Michael worked to restore the server, Katherine had unexpectedly stayed, helping Emma with her science homework at the kitchen table. By the time the crisis was resolved at 2 a.m., Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, and Katherine was nursing a cup of tea, looking more relaxed than Michael had ever seen her. "You're doing a remarkable job with her," Katherine had said quietly. "And with everything else." The compliment had caught him off guard. "Some days I feel like I'm failing at everything." "That's parenthood, from what I understand," Katherine had replied with a small smile. "My mother raised me alone after my father left. It wasn't easy for her, but she never let me see how hard she was struggling. Like you." It was the first personal detail Katherine had ever shared, and Michael had felt oddly privileged to receive it. As she left that night, something had shifted between boss and employee, the beginning of a friendship, perhaps. Over the following weeks, Katherine began stopping by Michael's desk more frequently, discussing projects but also asking about Emma. She approved his request to leave early for Emma's school play without hesitation and even sent a congratulatory card when Emma won her school's spelling bee. For his part, Michael began to see beyond Katherine's intimidating exterior to the woman beneath, brilliant and driven, yes, but also thoughtful and surprisingly funny when she let her guard down. He found himself looking forward to their interactions, appreciating the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled or how she absently twisted her hair when deep in thought. Emma, too, had developed an unexpected fondness for Ms. Cat, as she called her. When Katherine mentioned offhandedly that she'd never built a snowman, Emma had been appalled and insisted she join their weekend outing to the park after the first snowfall. Michael had expected Katherine to politely decline, but to his surprise, she'd appeared at the park bundled in an elegant coat, looking both out of place and somehow exactly where she belonged as Emma taught her the proper technique for snowball packing. "Your daughter is extraordinary," Katherine had told him as they watched Emma put the finishing touches on their lopsided creation. "You should be proud." "I am," Michael had replied, his chest tight with emotion. "She reminds me so much of her mother sometimes." Katherine had hesitated before asking, "Do you talk about her often?" "Your wife?" "Every day," Michael had said. "I never want Emma to forget her. But lately, it doesn't hurt quite as much to remember." Katherine had nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Healing isn't forgetting. It's just learning to carry the weight differently." The words had stayed with Michael, echoing in his mind during quiet moments. Katherine Chen was becoming important to him, to them, in ways he hadn't anticipated and wasn't entirely sure how to navigate. The turning point came unexpectedly, during a company retreat at a lakeside resort. The 3-day event was mandatory for all senior staff, and Michael had been forced to bring Emma when his usual sitter cancelled last minute. Katherine had assured him it wouldn't be a problem, even arranging for a hotel room with an adjoining bedroom for Emma. The first day had gone smoothly, with Emma happily exploring the resort grounds while Michael attended meetings. But on the second morning, disaster struck. Michael received an urgent call from a client while Emma was showering, and he stepped into the hallway to take it. The call ran long, and when he returned to the room, he found Emma in tears, surrounded by soaking wet clothes. "I tried to reach my special shampoo and knocked everything into the tub," she sobbed. "My clothes for today are all wet." Michael had been trying to calm her down when a knock came at the door. Katherine stood there, dressed in running clothes, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, a far cry from her usual polished appearance. "I heard crying," she said, concern evident in her voice. "Is everything okay?" Before Michael could answer, Emma had rushed forward, explaining the catastrophe through hiccuping sobs. Katherine had knelt down to eye level with the distraught child. "Well, that's certainly a problem, but not an unsolvable one, she'd said calmly. I have an idea. Why don't I take you shopping for new clothes? There's a little boutique in the lobby. Emma's tears had immediately stopped. Really? Can Daddy come too? Katherine had glanced at Michael. Your dad has an important presentation to prepare for this morning. But I happen to be an excellent shopping assistant. Michael had hesitated, torn between his responsibilities. Katherine, you don't have to. I want to, she'd interrupted. Unless you'd rather I didn't? Something in her expression, a vulnerability he rarely glimpsed, had made his decision easy. I trust you with her. Thank you. 2 hours later, Emma had returned bubbling with excitement, wearing a new outfit and chattering about how Ms. Cat had let her try on practically everything and bought her ice cream even though it wasn't after dinner. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Michael had found Katherine on the resort's terrace, gazing out at the moonlit lake. I can't thank you enough for today, he'd said, joining her at the railing. Katherine had smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. I always wanted children. It just never happened. Career first, then relationship later, except later never came. The confession had surprised him. It's not too late. Perhaps not, she'd replied softly. But finding someone who understands ambition and doesn't see it as a character flaw isn't easy. I understand it, Michael had said before he could stop himself. It's part of who you are. The same way being Emma's father is part of who I am. Katherine had turned to face him then, the moonlight silvering her features. For a breathless moment, Michael thought she might lean closer, but instead, she'd straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. We should both get some rest. Big day tomorrow. The moment had passed, but something had changed between them, an acknowledgement of possibilities neither was quite ready to voice. Back in the city, their relationship had continued to evolve. Katherine began joining them occasionally for weekend outings, a museum visit here, a movie night there. To Michael's surprise, she fit seamlessly into their lives, knowing when to engage and when to give father and daughter their space. Emma blossomed under Katherine's additional attention, proudly showing off her school projects and seeking her opinion on everything from science fair ideas to which color scrunchie looked best with her school uniform. For a child who had lost her mother at such a young age, having another caring female presence seemed to fill a void Michael hadn't fully recognized. As for Michael, he found himself looking at Katherine differently, noticing the way sunlight caught in her hair or how her entire face transformed when she laughed without restraint. He caught her watching him sometimes too, with an expression he couldn't quite decipher but that made his heart race nonetheless. Yet neither of them crossed the invisible line they'd drawn. Katherine was still his boss, and Michael was still healing. The risk of complicating their professional relationship, and potentially hurting Emma if things went wrong, felt too great. Until the company holiday party changed everything. The event was being held at an upscale hotel downtown, with employees encouraged to bring guests. Michael had initially planned to skip it, unwilling to leave Emma with a sitter on a Friday night. But Katherine had surprised him by suggesting Emma come along. It's a family-friendly event until 9, she'd explained. Several other employees are bringing their children. There's even a separate room with activities and movies set up for them. And so Michael had found himself in a rare suit, with Emma beside him in her favorite party dress, entering the elegantly decorated ballroom. Katherine had greeted them near the entrance, stunning in a deep blue dress that made Michael momentarily forget how to form coherent sentences. You look beautiful, Miss Cat. Emma had exclaimed, expressing what Michael couldn't. Katherine had smiled, kneeling to admire Emma's outfit in return. Not nearly as beautiful as you. That dress is perfect for twirling. Emma had demonstrated immediately, spinning until she giggled with dizziness. Katherine had laughed, steadying her with gentle hands. The children's room is through those doors, she'd explained to Michael. They have supervisors, crafts, holiday movies, and enough cookies to ensure no child sleeps tonight. Emma had been eager to join the other children, and after Michael checked out the setup and introduced himself to the supervisors, he'd returned to find Katherine waiting with 2 glasses of champagne. To surviving another year, she'd toasted. To unexpected friendships, he'd countered, clinking his glass against hers. The evening had progressed pleasantly, with Michael actually enjoying himself more than he'd anticipated. Katherine had introduced him to board members and clients, speaking highly of his contributions to recent projects. They'd shared a table during dinner, their conversation flowing easily from work to books to childhood memories. "Dance with me," Katherine had said suddenly as the band struck up a slow song. It wasn't quite a question, but her eyes had held a hint of uncertainty. Michael had hesitated only briefly before taking her outstretched hand. "I should warn you, I haven't done this in a while." "Neither have I," she'd admitted as they moved to the dance floor. "Not with anyone who mattered, anyway." The words had hung between them as Michael placed his hand carefully at her waist, maintaining a respectful distance as they began to move to the music. But as the song progressed, that distance had gradually diminished until Katherine's head rested lightly against his shoulder, her perfume enveloping him in a scent that was uniquely hers. "This is nice," she'd murmured, and Michael had tightened his arm around her in silent agreement. When the song ended, neither had immediately pulled away. Katherine had looked up at him, something unspoken in her gaze that made his breath catch. For a moment, Michael thought he might kiss her, wanted to kiss her, but the spell was broken by a colleague calling Katherine's name. The rest of the evening had passed in a pleasant blur, with Michael checking on Emma periodically, finding her happily engaged in crafting elaborate paper snowflakes, and sharing more dances with Katherine, though none quite as intimate as the first. At 9 o'clock, as promised, the family portion of the evening concluded. Michael collected a reluctant Emma, who was in the middle of a holiday movie marathon with her new friends. "Do we have to go now?" she'd pleaded. "We just got to the part where the reindeer learns to fly." Katherine, who had accompanied Michael to collect her, had knelt beside Emma. "I have the same movie at my house. Perhaps you and your dad could come over tomorrow to finish it? I make pretty good hot chocolate too." Emma had looked to Michael with hopeful eyes. "Can we, Daddy? Please?" And that was how, the following afternoon, Michael found himself in Katherine's sleek downtown apartment, watching his daughter and his boss build a blanket fort in the living room while holiday music played softly in the background. Katherine's home was exactly as he'd imagined it would be, elegant and minimalist, with carefully chosen art and furniture that spoke of refined taste. Yet she'd unhesitatingly rearranged her pristine living room to accommodate Emma's fort-building vision, even contributing additional blankets when their architectural ambitions expanded. "I haven't done this since I was about your age," Katherine had told Emma as they strung Christmas lights inside their creation. "Didn't you build forts when you were a grown-up?" Emma had asked, genuinely puzzled. Katherine had glanced at Michael before answering. "I've been very busy being a grown-up. Sometimes I forget to do the fun things." "Daddy says grown-ups need fun too," Emma had declared with the certainty only children possess. "Otherwise, they get grumpy and their faces get stuck in frown mode." Michael had laughed, slightly embarrassed. "I think what I actually said was that everyone needs balance in their lives." "Same thing," Emma had shrugged, returning to her decorating. Katherine had caught Michael's eye over Emma's head, her smile soft. "Your daddy is very wise." They'd spent the afternoon watching holiday movies in the fort, sharing the promised hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows that Katherine had apparently purchased specifically for Emma's visit. As the winter sun set early outside the windows, casting the apartment in golden light, Michael had found himself watching Katherine more than the movie, the way she laughed unreservedly at the silly parts, her genuine engagement with Emma's running commentary, the relaxed contentment that seemed to have settled over her in their company. When Emma had fallen asleep between them, head resting against Katherine's shoulder, Michael had carefully extracted his daughter without waking her. "I should get her home," he'd whispered. Katherine had nodded, gently brushing Emma's hair from her forehead in a gesture so tender it made Michael's heart constrict. "Of course. Let me help you gather her things. They'd moved quietly around the apartment, collecting Emma's coat and shoes, the drawing she'd made for Catherine's refrigerator, the small stuffed reindeer Katherine had unexpectedly presented to her upon arrival. At the door, with Emma still sleeping in his arms, Michael had paused. Thank you for today. It was perfect. It was, wasn't it? Katherine had replied softly. I can't remember the last time my apartment felt so alive. The moment had stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Katherine had leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, her hand resting briefly on his arm. Drive safely, she'd whispered, and Michael had nodded, unable to trust his voice. That evening had marked a turning point. Over the following weeks, the three of them spent increasingly more time together. Katherine joined them for dinner at least once a week, helped Emma with her science project, and even attended her school's winter concert, sitting beside Michael and beaming with pride when Emma's class performed. At work, they maintained professional boundaries, but everyone noticed the change in their dynamic. Katherine smiled more, and Michael approached challenges with renewed confidence. They made a formidable team professionally, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Yet despite the growing closeness, neither had taken the final step to define what was developing between them. Michael still wore his wedding ring, and Katherine never pressed for more than he offered. They existed in a comfortable limbo, more than friends but not quite acknowledging the deeper emotions that surfaced in quiet moments. Until the day everything changed, the day that began with a simple question. It was a Saturday morning, and Katherine had joined them for their weekend tradition of pancake breakfast. Afterward, they planned to take Emma ice skating at the park. The domesticity of the scene, Katherine at his kitchen counter, helping Emma measure flour while wearing one of his aprons over her casual clothes, filled Michael with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. You've got flour on your nose, he'd told Katherine, reaching out to brush it away without thinking. His fingers had lingered against her skin, and for a moment, the kitchen had fallen silent except for the soft music playing from the radio. Emma had broken the spell, giggling as she deliberately smeared flour on her own nose. Now I match Ms. Cat. The moment had passed, but throughout breakfast, Michael caught Katherine watching him with an expression that made his pulse quicken. There was a new awareness between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that they were teetering on the edge of something significant. After breakfast, as they prepared to leave for the park, Katherine had realized her sweater had pancake batter on the sleeve. I have a change of clothes in my car, she'd explained. I came straight from the gym this morning. She'd retrieved her gym bag and then hesitated in the hallway, glancing between the bathroom door and Michael, who was helping Emma tie her skates to check the fit before they left. Should I change here or look away? Katherine had asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice that suggested she was asking a much bigger question. Michael had looked up, meeting her gaze across the room. Emma was chattering beside him, oblivious to the weight of the moment. He thought about Sophia, about the grief that had nearly consumed him, about the life he'd rebuilt for Emma and himself. And he thought about Katherine, strong, brilliant Katherine, who had somehow found her way into their hearts. Do whatever you want, he'd said quietly, the words carrying more meaning than their simplicity suggested. It wasn't just about changing clothes. It was permission, for both of them, to move forward, to take a chance on the connection that had been building between them. Katherine had held his gaze for a long moment before nodding slightly. I'll be right back, she'd said, disappearing into the bathroom with her bag. When she emerged a few minutes later in fresh clothes, something had shifted. The invisible barrier between them had dissolved, leaving only possibility in its wake. At the park, as Emma skated ahead of them, Katherine had reached for Michael's hand, intertwining their fingers without a word. He'd squeezed gently in response, his heart lighter than it had been in years. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Katherine had lingered at the door instead of saying her usual goodbye. I should go, she'd said, making no move to leave. Michael had taken a deep breath, gathering his courage. Or you could stay. Katherine's eyes had widened slightly. Are you sure? Instead of answering, Michael had stepped forward, cupping her face gently in his hands. I've been sure for a while now. I was just afraid. Of what? She'd whispered. Of feeling this way again. Of risking Emma's heart along with mine. Of losing someone else I care about. Katherine had placed her hands over his. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. But I can promise I'll never willingly leave you or Emma. You've become my family, Michael. The family I never thought I'd have. He'd kissed her then, softly at first, then with growing certainty as she responded, her arms wrapping around his neck to draw him closer. They'd talked for hours that night, sitting close on the couch, sharing fears and hopes and dreams. Katherine confessed her own insecurities about stepping into a family already formed, about living up to the memory of a woman she'd never met but whose presence she felt in the home Sophia had once shared with Michael and Emma. I'm not trying to replace her, Katherine had said earnestly. I would never want to. I know, Michael had assured her. Sophia will always be Emma's mother and a part of our lives. But there's room in our hearts for you too, a different space, but just as important. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. Emma, despite her fondness for Katherine, had moments of confusion and occasional jealousy as Katherine's role in their lives evolved. The first time she'd found Katherine making breakfast in their kitchen on a weekday morning, she'd grown quiet and withdrawn. Later that day, Michael had found Emma in her room, looking at photos of Sophia. Is Ms. Kat going to be my new mommy? She'd asked, her voice small. Michael had sat beside her, choosing his words carefully. Katherine cares about us very much, and I care about her. She's becoming a special part of our family, but that doesn't change anything about your mommy. No one will ever replace her, Emma. But mommy's not coming back, Emma had said, a statement rather than a question. No, sweetheart, she's not, Michael had confirmed gently. But she would want us to be happy, don't you think? She would want us to have people in our lives who love us and take care of us. Emma had considered this, tracing her finger over Sophia's smiling face in the photograph. Does Ms. Kat make you happy, Daddy? Yes, Michael had answered honestly. She does. She makes me happy too, Emma had admitted. But sometimes I feel bad about it, like I'm forgetting mommy. Michael had pulled his daughter close. Being happy doesn't mean you're forgetting. It means you're living, just like mommy would want you to. The conversation had been a turning point for Emma. She'd begun to ask Katherine questions about her own mother, forming a connection through their shared experience of maternal love. Katherine, for her part, had been unfailingly patient, never pushing for more than Emma was ready to give. 6 months after that first kiss, Katherine had moved in with them. They'd decided against finding a new place, agreeing that maintaining the home Emma had grown up in provided important stability. Katherine had integrated her life into theirs with surprising ease, her minimalist style softening against the lived-in comfort of their apartment. The adjustment at work had been another challenge. Katherine had disclosed their relationship to the board immediately, implementing safeguards to ensure no conflict of interest. Michael now reported to another executive, though he and Katherine still collaborated on key projects where their combined expertise was valuable. There had been gossip, of course, whispers about the boss and the widowed employee, speculation about Katherine's motives or Michael's ambition. But those who knew them saw the truth. Two people who had found each other when neither was looking, creating something beautiful from unexpected circumstances. A year into their relationship, on a crisp autumn day much like the one when Sophia had died, Michael had taken Katherine to the cemetery. It was something he and Emma did every year on the anniversary, bringing flowers, sharing stories, maintaining the connection to the woman they had loved. Are you sure you want me here? Katherine had asked as they approached the grave, Emma running ahead to place her carefully selected bouquet. Michael had squeezed her hand. Yes. You're part of our lives now. All of our lives. They'd stood together before the headstone, Emma between them, each lost in private thoughts. After a moment, Emma had looked up at Katherine. "I think Mommy would have liked you," she'd said simply. Katherine's eyes had filled with tears. "That's the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." Later that evening, after Emma was asleep, Michael had found Katherine on the balcony, gazing at the stars. "Thank you for today," she'd said as he joined her. "For including me in something so personal." Michael had wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You're not just part of my life, Katherine. You're part of my heart." He'd reached into his pocket then, producing a small velvet box. Katherine had turned in his arms, her eyes widening as he opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "I'm not asking you to replace what I lost," he'd said softly. "I'm asking you to help me build something new. Something that honors the past but looks toward the future. Our future." Katherine's hands had trembled as she touched the ring. "Are you sure? All of this, me, us, it happened so unexpectedly." "The best things often do," Michael had replied. "Emma and I were doing okay before you came into our lives. We were surviving. But with you, we're thriving. You haven't tried to erase our past, you've helped us integrate it into our present. You've shown me it's possible to keep loving Sophia while also loving you completely." Tears had spilled down Katherine's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she'd whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The wedding had been small and intimate, just family and close friends gathered in the park where they'd first built a snowman together. Emma had served as both flower girl and ring bearer, beaming with pride in her special dress. During the ceremony, they'd included a moment of remembrance for Sophia, lighting a candle in her honor. It was Katherine who had suggested it, understanding that acknowledging Sophia's place in their history strengthened rather than threatened their future. "I take you, Michael," Katherine had said in her vows, "not just as my husband, but as part of a package deal that includes the amazing daughter you've raised and the memory of the woman who will always be part of your heart. I promise to honor that memory, to love Emma as my own, and to spend every day making sure you never regret taking a chance on us." Michael's voice had broken as he'd responded, "I take you, Katherine, as my wife and partner, grateful every day for the question you asked and the answer I gave that changed everything. You didn't just enter our lives, you completed them in ways I never imagined possible." Emma had insisted on saying her own vows, carefully written on notepaper decorated with hearts and stars. "I promise to be a good daughter to both of you, to pick up my toys most of the time, and to remember that families can grow in different ways but still be perfect." There hadn't been a dry eye among the guests. Now, as Michael watches Katherine helping Emma with her homework at the kitchen table, their wedding rings catching the afternoon light, he marvels at how a simple question, "Should I change here or look away?" had led to this moment of perfect contentment. Life rarely follows our carefully laid plans. Sometimes it takes away what we thought we couldn't live without, leaving us broken and adrift. And sometimes, when we least expect it, it brings us exactly what we need to become whole again. Katherine looks up, catching his gaze, and smiles, that special smile she reserves just for him. Emma chatters excitedly about her science project, secure in the knowledge that she is loved completely by both the adults in her life. And Michael knows with absolute certainty that this unexpected family they've created together is exactly where all of them belong. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys that remind us of the resilience of the human spirit and the unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. Share in the comments if you've ever experienced an unexpected connection that changed your life, because sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our stories begin with the simplest questions.